Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone here has come to honor Harris Wofford, and the family deeply appreciates the presence of each of you. Nevertheless, protocol and courtesy counsel that we take a moment at the very beginning to individually recognize a few of the very distinguished friends of Harris who are here today, and I want to do that at the outset. First, General Colin Powell and his wife, Alma Powell. My governor, Governor Tom Wolf. Senator Robert Casey and his wife, Therese Casey. Senator Tom Daschle. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. And Congressman Dwight Evans. And finally, Jody Olson, Director of the Peace Corps. Ironically, last evening as we drove home, my wife reflected on her visit to the Peace Corps exhibit at the JFK Library some years ago. As we drove, she recalled that as she entered the exhibit, there was a book enclosed in a display case, and the book was open to a page that had a photograph of Harris Wofford explaining the concept of the Peace Corps in India to a group of dignitaries and officials of the Indian government. As she thought back on that for a moment, she turned to me and she said, "Damn, Harris was doing good way back then." And indeed he was. In the words of Martin Luther King, his life was dedicated to bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. Harris played a crucial role in President Clinton nominating me to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, the appellate court that hears appeals from the district courts in Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the Virgin Islands, just as he played a crucial role in securing President Clinton's nomination of my friend and colleague, Judge Midge Rendell, to that court. His efforts on our behalf have resulted in our being confirmed as appellate judges with lifetime tenure to a judicial level that is second only to the Supreme Court of the United States. So his legacy lives on through each of us, just as it lives through so many of you. I will never forget my interview with Harris. It was scheduled to last 30 minutes. You know it. I had just finished reading his book the weekend before. It started at 3:30 and it ended 3.5 hours later. But yet, as I left his office, it seemed like it had only lasted 30 minutes. And when I left his office, I was incredibly uplifted. And I was uplifted because I realized that as much as I hoped my judicial candidacy would bear fruit, and that President Clinton would, in fact, nominate me and the Senate would confirm me to the Court of Appeals, I walked away with the realization that no matter what happened with my judicial candidacy, my life was so much richer because I had just spent 3.5 hours with one of the most remarkable people I had ever had the good fortune to meet. And so it is with so many of you in this auditorium. Our lives are richer for having known Harris Wofford. For the next couple of hours, we're going to hear from several people who knew and loved Harris in many different ways, and whose lives were also enriched because he touched each of us, just as he touched so many of you in this room. As you'll see from the program, there are many speakers, but how could it be otherwise if we are to even begin to do justice to the memory of a man who spent so many years in such rich devotion to others? Each of our speakers will polish a particular facet of Harris Wofford, his life and his memory, and each will help us better appreciate this incredibly wonderful and decent man. And to begin, I'd like to ask our President of Howard, Wayne Frederick, to welcome us.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Hilltop here at Howard University and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as Howard's 17th president, as well as being a triple alum myself. And that's probably one of the many things I have in common with Senator Wofford. On March 2nd, 1867, 152 years ago to the day, Howard University was chartered by an act of Congress. We are honored to host this memorial service for one of our most distinguished alums, an individual who exemplified our core values of truth and service. It is fitting that we gather here to celebrate the life of a man who embodied excellence in that truth and service. Service is in the DNA of our students. One of the many examples will occur next week during spring break, where 1,000 of my students who will travel abroad to serve others through the alternative spring break program instead of going to Daytona Beach or South Beach. While we're historically a black university, Howard University has always stood for the education of all people. Our law school will celebrate its 150th anniversary this year and was organized for the advancement of the cause of social justice through the law for the benefit of those kept on the margins of our society. Senator Wofford was a distinguished 1954 graduate of our law school and went on to work to advance civil rights at a time when our nation reckoned with the question of who qualified to be a full citizen. He leaves a lasting legacy of unity in his work to establish the Peace Corps that knit our world closer together through generations of volunteers. Howard University remains the top producer of Peace Corps volunteers among the historically black colleges and universities. Senator Wofford transcended those barriers and lived his life to the fullest and on his own terms in the pursuit of building unity in an often fractured world. Again, welcome to Howard University, and thank you for being here to honor a life well lived and a life that we should all use as an example. God bless the memory and legacy of Senator Harris Wofford. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so we are here to celebrate, as Dr. Frederick said, the life of somebody who lived life to the fullest and with great joy. So let's try that one more time with some spirit, with some energy, with some love and some joy. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think Harris can hear you now. My name is Martin Rodgers, and I was honored to serve on Senator Wofford's staff in the Senate. I believe in the history of the Senate, I was the only legislative assistant to have one issue, namely national and community service. That says a lot about who Senator Wofford was, and for him, national and community service was everything. So it was the most important issue, and I don't think there'll ever be another legislative assistant solely dedicated to one issue, let alone national and community service. Father Theodore Hesburgh was Senator Wofford's most important mentor, friend, spiritual counselor, collaborator, co-conspirator, and co-creator for nearly 60 years. With the exception of my parents, these two men had more influence on who I am now and who, with God's grace, I am still striving to become than anyone else. In the late 1950s, Father Ted recruited a bright, young, and up-and-coming DC lawyer from Howard University, from Howard Law School, named Harris Wofford, to be his counsel on the newly formed U.S. Civil Rights Commission created by President Eisenhower. This bipartisan commission, comprised of Northern and Southern appointees, was designed to fail. But instead, with the leadership of Father Ted and Harris Wofford, it would unanimously propose sweeping changes and set the stage for the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and many other important pieces of legislation. It could well be argued that without their collaboration, many of the freedoms that I currently enjoy as a person of color today in America would simply not be possible. Father Ted would recruit Harris to the faculty at the University of Notre Dame, and the picture shown here is of the two men together at the 50th anniversary of the Hesburgh Library, where Father Ted asked Senator Wofford to deliver the only keynote address. The Hesburgh Library, for you football fans, is best known for its mural seen on Saturdays, Touchdown Jesus. Father Ted was Senator Wofford's priest. The two would also co-create and help launch the Peace Corps, and later in 1972, Father Ted would chair the commission which would advance Harris's idea for the creation of something called a corporation for national service. I suspect that sounds familiar to many of you, as 21 years later, President Clinton would create just such a corporation, and in turn, AmeriCorps, and Harris would later become the CEO of the corporation after leading the fight for the bill's passage in the U.S. Senate. So we begin today quite fittingly with Father Hesburgh's favorite prayer, "Come, Holy Spirit." A very simple prayer, seeking wisdom to help those who with great passion and with great love, with fire, seek to make the world a better place for all. A very simple prayer for those like Senator Wofford and Father Ted, who sought to renew the face of the earth, and in so doing, to know the joy of the resurrection. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and thou shalt renew the face of the earth. Let us pray, O God, who taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit. Grant that by the gift of that same Spirit, we may always be truly wise and ever rejoice in his resurrection. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Marty. That was wonderful. Great to have Father Ted here with us in spirit. It's wonderful to see so many friends here today, and of course our great extended family here in full force again in front of me. And also to have so many colleagues here who share Dad's commitment to causes larger than themselves and took the risk to enter the public arena with all the sacrifice that entails. I want to thank President Frederick, wherever he is, Cynthia Roderick, and the staff of Crampton Auditorium that did such a wonderful job in making this service possible. And we're honored to have our friend, Governor Tom Wolf, so fittingly a returned Peace Corps volunteer from India, here with us, and our great Senator and friend Bob Casey and his wife Therese, who will share their reflections later. I give a quick shout out to my pal Sheldon Whitehouse, who inherited my dad's desk on the Senate floor. Good to have you here, and so many other dear friends. I'm also going to mention Kathleen Kennedy Townsend and Tim Shriver, who you'll be hearing from, representing the great Kennedy and Shriver clans that were so important to our family and my father. The great Mae West, who knew something about living life fully, once said, "You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough." My father certainly did it right, but we're not here to sanctify him today. I'm channeling my late mother, Claire, who would have been sure to keep us grounded here. My father could, on occasion, as some of you here may remember, frustrate many around him. Indeed, he could be very stubborn. Mom used to say, after years of listening to Harris speak, "I can tolerate another speech if I hear one new thing." And thankfully, every so often she did, and we did too. She loved him, and we remember her today. In early January, fortuitously, I spent 3 days with my father, my last time with him. I'd come down to D.C. to assist 2 archivists who are here today, somewhere in the audience, sorting out papers stored in his apartment building's dusty basement garage. Among the artifacts we found buried under meaningless flyers and grocery receipts, he didn't throw out a thing, were handwritten notes from several presidents, letters to and from Sarge Shriver, Bayard Rustin, and Martin Luther King. We even found a 1991 Pennsylvania GOP opposition research tome. It sought to expose Harris as a communist or worse. It was called Spare Us from Harris. And I can say how my mother would have loved that document. I am going to see if we can get it published and circulated. Who knows, Thornburg might have won if they'd used it more strategically. My dad had an amazing ability over the decades to reinvent himself, creatively, inventively. And this included some myth-making that was necessary to fulfill his dreams. He once claimed in a speech during a 1992 West Coast trip after the 1991 election, raising funds, as Senator Dash will know, after all the money poured in at the end from the DSCC, he had to pay his dues to raise some of it back. We were at an event in San Diego, and Dad had claimed to have voted for FDR. I did some quick fact-checking. I knew it didn't happen. Later, when we were driving with Senator Mitchell, George Mitchell, up to L.A., I found the moment to pounce, to disabuse him of this myth-making. You weren't old enough to vote in 1944, Dad. Do the math. He paused a good while, then laughed hard and said, well, I felt like I voted for him. My father taught me the power of optimism and forward thinking. When appointed to the Senate at age 65, he enjoyed saying, it's earlier than you think. A mantra he invoked often when he found me worrying about lost opportunities. His attitude to me was always, move on, man. Just keep going. Just keep going forward. So sometimes he was less than empathetic. But he always came through when someone in the family or in his larger circle of friends faced a serious problem or challenge. He was there for me night and day when it mattered. Night and day. His watchword that signaled something was important, a cause worth fighting for. Last year, as he recovered from the flu, I reminded him of this mantra. Dad, don't forget it's earlier than you think. But this time, he said, I don't think that anymore, at least not about myself. It's getting later. His timing was exquisite, showing up at critical junctures in the civil rights movement and several presidential elections. And on top of that, he found a way to die on Martin Luther King Day. He left us while still vital and able to hug me one last time as I left his apartment after digging through the boxes in that dusty basement. He uttered his oft-repeated words, I love you beyond measure. I say goodbye today, understanding him now more fully than ever, while still feeling that certain aspects of who he was will always remain an enigma to me. But I do know this, Dad. I do know this, Dad. I love you too, beyond measure.
Good afternoon. My name is AnnMaura Connolly, and I worked with Harris at the Corporation for National and Community Service. While Harris and I started out as boss and staffer, we quickly became close friends and co-conspirators, as he liked to say, and our work together spanned more than 2 decades, pushing the idea that every person in this country should be asked and given the opportunity to serve. The reality is that service was the through line of Harris's remarkable life. His passion for creating a more just world began early, When Harris was just 19, he wrote his first book called It's Up to Us, and I'd like to share a passage. One night in 1941, as our family settled down to a normal weekday evening, as my Latin grew intolerably difficult, I put my homework aside and decided to take a bath, turning up my radio a little louder so I wouldn't miss a thing. Mr. District Attorney rushed to its dramatic finish when the program changed. If the radio had been within reach, I would have quickly turned the dial. Speeches started coming over the air from a banquet at the Waldorf Astoria featuring Clarence Strait, Thomas Mann, and Claire Booth Luce. The subject was a World Federal Union of Free Men. As I heard the words, the idea of a United States of the world in our time changed my life's course. I sat there trying to find some catch in the proposition. In those first seconds, I felt that I had found a living truth. I felt as if I had always lived with the ingredients of a world union idea around me. Suddenly, all those ideas had chemically charged together, combining into a dynamic, world-shaking idea. Those speeches lit a spark in Harris, who at the time was just 15 years old. He went to the bookstore and he bought Union Now, a book by Clarence Strait. And he wrote, "When I finished that book, I felt as though I really understood the great problems of our times and world unity." So I'd been discussing world union with a number of friends from school, and several of us decided to go to New York. We marched into the Federal Union Incorporated office and asked, "What can students do to help?" The receptionist looked doubtful. Finally, she said, "Well, why don't you form the first high school chapter?" It required 7 members to be chartered as a chapter. So that night, we got on our bikes with an idea and a bundle of literature and rode out to enlist 7 members. And that night, the Scarsdale Student Chapter of Federal Union was born. The Student Federalist movement grew quickly in the wake of World War II, with chapters emerging in hundreds of high schools and colleges and a central office in Washington, D.C. Naturally, Harris became the Student Federalist president and soon met Emmylou Lindgren, a debate champion whose name he changed to Claire and married in 1948. A lifelong adventure on civic action and social change began. Harris and Claire traveled to India to study Gandhian civil disobedience, and they jointly wrote a book called India Afire. They traveled to Israel and spent a summer living on a kibbutz. From there, they came to Washington, D.C., where Harris studied law here at Howard, and then served as an aide to Father Ted Hesburgh, who had been appointed by President Eisenhower to a new civil rights commission. In 1961, President Kennedy appointed Harris as his special assistant for civil rights, and from there he went on to work with Sergeant Shriver to create the Peace Corps. Now, Harris, being Harris, wasn't content to work on the Peace Corps here in Washington. He wanted to be where the action was, so he moved his young family to Ethiopia, where they lived from 1962 to 1964. In the late 1960s and 70s, he served as the president of a new college called Old Westbury on Long Island, and then as the president of Bryn Mawr College. In the 1980s, he served as Governor Casey's Secretary of Labor and Industry, and then in 1991, he was appointed to fill the seat of Senator John Heinz after his death in a tragic plane crash. In the election that followed, Harris won a dramatic victory against former Governor Dick Thornburgh. As senator, has been noted, Harris championed health care and national service, working with colleagues to pass the legislation creating the Corporation for National and Community Service and leading the effort to designate the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday as a national day of service. Following his time at the Senate, fittingly, Harris was appointed by President Clinton to serve as CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service, and that's where our paths converged. And those are just the highlights. From those early years in the Student Federalist movement on, Harris played pivotal roles in nearly every important social and political movement of the last 75 years. He was a restless agitator for justice, animated by a deep belief that his beloved country must deliver on the promise of a better nation and world for all. That is what he spent his extraordinary life working toward, and that is the charge we must carry forth. Thank you.
Harris Wofford was very emotionally involved in all of these matters and was, as I say, was rather, in some areas, was a slight madman.
What a warm, wonderful homecoming for me. I thank all of you. Let me tell you a story of how I got here. When I was 22, I traveled to India to study Gandhi. Before I arrived, he was assassinated, but his trail was fresh. It was over in India that people started saying to me, the Gandhi people, what have you done about segregation in the United States? Have you been to jail to oppose it? I came back awakened to the issue of race in this country.
The very first thing I read about civil disobedience was in the Howard University Law Review. It was an article by Harris Wofford. I said, who is this guy at Howard University? And then I discovered he was white. And I said, what's he doing writing in the Howard University Law Review? And they said, well, that's where you went to school.
For a young white man to make a decision to go to Harvard University Law School, when he did, that was unreal, unbelievable.
The part that nobody knows was that Martin Luther King was put in chains in the back of a paddy wagon with a German Shepherd. And he was driven in the middle of the night from Atlanta to Reidsville, which with no expressways was somewhere around 6 to 8 hours. He used to say that those of us who say we're willing to give our lives don't really know what we're talking about. We expect a sudden clinical death, being shot or stabbed or something like that. And he'd been shot at, his home had been bombed, and he'd been stabbed. But he said that night was worse than dying.
Coretta King called me when she heard what had happened. She was 6 months pregnant, and I'd never seen her hysterical before. After she called me, I said, well, if maybe John Kennedy would just call on the phone to Coretta and say, we're doing everything we can, something like that. So I talked to Sergeant Shriver on the phone. He said, it's of course the thing to do. And he zoomed out to O'Hare Airport and proposed the idea. And Kennedy thought for a minute and said, do you have her phone number?
Well, I owe a great debt of gratitude to Senator Kennedy and his family for this. And I will always say that I'm deeply indebted to him for it. Thank you very much, Dr. King.
Well, I think, judged by the result, you can honestly say that Harris Wofford, in that gesture, won the election for John F. Kennedy.
That's a nice footnote that this made the difference in electing Kennedy. Most people agree that it did. But if you win by 100,000 votes, there are lots of things that make a difference. If he had lost, there'd be a lot of people analyzing and said the call to Mrs. King, lost the election. Success has 1,000 fathers, and defeat is an orphan.
Harris' phone call, thank God, elected John Kennedy. But even more thankful, for us, he was always the one who maybe saved Martin's life with a phone call.
That was beautiful. One of the things that I learned from my father is that you don't really know what will happen. Understanding the unpredictability and the unknowability of the future, I think that's what he was just talking about in that film, and what that means for politics. Never say, so-and-so will never get elected, or that will never happen. Now, you've already heard this from my brother Dan, but some of us have always felt that my father had an exquisite sense of timing, getting involved in being interested in Gandhian civil disobedience just as the civil rights movement was really taking off. But I think part of his point was that he made that timing. So we have to, it's that sense of optimism that really made it possible, and you never know. My father influenced my life in many ways that I only see more and more as I grow older. His love for the classics and the books of the great St. John's and Chicago curricula was one of the great ideas that animated him. He inspired in me a desire for an intellectual life filled with ideas and poetry. And one of my earliest memories of my father is sitting on his lap in a room with people in a circle discussing a book. No doubt it was a great book seminar happening in our living room in Holland Hills, Virginia, when I was very little. Shh, he would say. We are following the question where it leads. Later, he led the same kind of great book seminar at the Aspen Institute, where he had groups of executives and political leaders reading and acting out and discussing Sophocles' play Antigone, along with the founding documents of the United States. He never lost his belief in the centrality and value of studying these books. One of his earliest political moves, as we've heard, founding the Student Federalists at 16, sprang in part from his trip around the world with his grandmother at 11. The larger world was so important to him, and he made it mean so much to us too. Something of that Student Federalist urge towards world government was bred into me and colors my terrible regret and dismay at Brexit and at the notion of building a wall on our southern border. As Dad would say, reading a favorite poem, something there is that does not love a wall. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. That's from Frost's Mending Wall. Some of his activities as a Student Federalist caused the beginning of the building of an FBI file, which he later had occasion to see parts of unedited, though now much of it, I should say, some parts of it, are still blacked out for national security. He was obviously a major national security risk. For instance, attending an Internationalist Youth Congress as the Student Federalist representative, a Congress that was dominated by youth leaders from Eastern Europe, just at the beginning of the Cold War. Besides for making a number of lifelong friends at this conference, what Dad learned from the Congress was this: the communists would stay up the longest and stay longest at the meetings, and they stayed up the latest, and so they won most of the votes. And Dad took us to the world, our children on long around-the-world trips, and us to Ethiopia during his Peace Corps years. 3 special memories of that transformative experience include one which was galloping with my father on the top of the gorgeous Entoto Mountain, the highest mountain ringing Addis Ababa, near Entoto Mariam Church, and feeling the magic and the beauty and the freedom of the open spaces and views. With Dad, it was always about views. When I think of it now, it seems to me that it was unbelievably dangerous. And I can hardly believe that we survived. But that was Dad. Because, as you know, my father was a daring man and an adventuresome one. When I was 11, our family went on a trip in Ethiopia with Dad to visit a number of Peace Corps volunteers' sites, going up east from Addis through Debre Birhan, Dessie, Mekelle, and on to Asmara. For reasons that I don't know, from Asmara, my mother and brothers went back to Addis, perhaps in a plane, and I continued on in a Land Rover with my father and probably a couple of volunteers or Peace Corps staff. From Asmara, we went to Aksum, the Queen of Sheba's capital, and on to the source of the Blue Nile, Lake Tana, near Gondar. I can imagine now the appeal to Dad of swimming in the source of the Blue Nile. He was a real romantic. But we were told that in the lake there were snails that could give swimmers the quite awful disease of schistosomiasis. But never mind. If you go far enough out in the lake, into the middle, the snails aren't there, and you'll be fine. So off we went in a small boat to swim in the middle of the lake, and I still remember the beautiful glow on the sunset, of the sunset on the lake after we swam, and my father's deep pleasure at the water, the sunset, the volunteers, the lake, and the entire experience of immersion in the beauty of Ethiopia. My father was a funny man as well, whose characteristic responses were so consistent that they could be easily laughed about, like his propensity to make close friends in odd spots on a moment's notice. When my family had just moved to Madison, Wisconsin in 1992, my father managed to visit us by coming to give a campaign speech for Clinton. His speech was to be at a rally on Library Mall at the university, a large open space lined with several food carts where students would grab a quick snack. One was labeled East African food. Dad was in town for about 2 hours, and I left him briefly at the site of the rally, and when I returned, I was confronted with the question, "Do you know my good friend Mikaeli? He is from Harar." Of course, I had not yet Mikaeli. A final memory from Ethiopia comes from our first months there, when we, our family, and all the volunteers went to meet Haile Selassie, the diminutive emperor, king of kings, conquering lion of Judah, who spoke little English, but he did speak French. Some of the Ethiopia One volunteers who are here will remember this reception as well. When our turn came, my father proudly announced that I, aged 10, spoke French. I had in fact been 1 month to a camp at Beauvoir here in Washington. And we had a picture of me in front of the emperor holding up my finger saying, "Un petit peu." And that photograph has helped to solidify my memory, but it was a picture lost in the Great Fire in my father's office at Old Westbury, where he lost countless valuable papers, photographs, and documents. I mention the lost picture because my father, whose zest for life was so intense, suffered many deep losses. I still remember the surprise of seeing him and my mother crying while shouting out on the phone from Ethiopia, trying to hear well, that John Kennedy had been shot. They felt so far away in that moment. The grief was perhaps even more intense with Martin Luther King's death and then Bobby Kennedy's a few months later. As we suffer his loss, I think of his loss of deep friends, his own experience of this loss. So much experience and confrontation with death maybe gave him some of his love of life, of change, of experience, of movement, and of pleasure, something to seize at any moment. I went with my father to the funeral marches of Martin Luther King, first in Memphis and then in Atlanta. I was 16. In Memphis, the march was not so big, but in Atlanta, it was huge. Dad wanted to get into the Ebenezer Baptist Church where the funeral service for King was happening, but the crowd's press against the church and in that arena was very intense. He found a friend, an African-American minister from somewhere in the South, and handed me over to this person. He was saying, "I'll be right back." Sometime later, the pressure outside the church became more worrisome, and the minister thought that maybe we should move to another spot. And I think we both realized that we might end up spending the entire day together, given the size of the crowd. Luckily for the minister, Dad appeared just in time to keep us from being permanently separated. But I still remember the vision of the vast number of people on the 8-lane highway, it seemed, stretching back behind us for a mile or more as the crowd marched to Morehouse College, where a public service for King would happen. A short passage from the book he wrote about the visit of Ramanohar Loya, the great Indian Gandhian socialist leader who came to America in 1951, and Harris traveled with him around the country, around the South. This passage captures Dad's own sense of loss better than I can. This book was on the table near the couch where I sat with him in late December, and it was very much on his mind. The chapter is called "One Gets So Lonely," which turns out to have been a quotation from Einstein, who knew that Dad had visited Einstein with Loya, and Einstein meeting Loya had felt a true kinship. So the chapter is called "One Gets So Lonely," and this is a quote from Harris. "We each should have our favorite revolutionaries, political artists, and teachers, and I have been luckier than anyone deserves. Yet in one season of death, the most Socratic teacher I ever expect to meet, Scott Buchanan, has died, and two of the men to whom I was most devoted in politics, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, were killed. And in this year of tears, began with the terrible loss of Ram Manohar Loya, a man who will always walk on the waters of my memory as the embodiment of a permanent and peaceful revolution. Walk on the waters of my memory, a beautiful phrase. Dad ended the chapter quoting Loya, who had written, "I once met a man, and his memory shimmers the past." I once met a man, and his memory shimmers the path. Harris writes, "He meant Gandhi. I meant Loya." And we can add, we mean Harris. For I believe for all of us, Harris will walk on the waters of our memory, and his memory will shimmer the path.
I am honored to be here. My name is Tom Wolf, Governor of Pennsylvania. I'm honored to be here to help celebrate Harris's life and to remember him. And I'm here for two reasons. First of all, to pay tribute to a Pennsylvania citizen who honored the Commonwealth in many different ways by his service. And second, to pay tribute to a human being who was an inspiration to me personally. In both, I extend my deepest condolences to all who loved him. And I want to thank especially Harris's family, his husband, his children, his grandchildren, for sharing him with us. His life story is a remarkable one. He served always, well, I should say he seemed always to be where something was happening, something important. And it turned out that some of those things that were important were happening simply because he was there. Thus, he and Claire traveled to India, as you've heard, soon after independence, where they met most of the leaders who actually led the independence movement. He was Father Ted Hesburgh's lieutenant in the Civil Rights Commission. He brought Gandhian nonviolence to Martin Luther King's civil rights movement. He convinced JFK of the need to take civil rights seriously, including his famous call to Coretta Scott King. He helped Sergeant Shriver found the Peace Corps. He was a college president twice. He served in Governor Robert Casey's cabinet. He was a U.S. Senator. In all these things, he made our world a much, much better one. And it was truly a great thing that some of these chapters in his distinguished life actually connected with my state, Pennsylvania. All of us in Pennsylvania, therefore, remember him with great appreciation, and we, like all of you, mourn his passing. But I also appreciated Harris personally. I got to know him through our shared commitment to the Peace Corps. He as one of the founders, I as a volunteer in India. He was possessed by the idea and the practice of service. From the Peace Corps to the Citizen Service Project in Pennsylvania to actually elected office, to public service. I blame him for me being where I am today. He judged himself and the people he knew by their willingness to serve. Like many others here today, I was privileged to know him. I was privileged to work with him. And I was privileged to see firsthand how his passion for serving others made the lives of so many of us better. As Harris said in his last words on the Senate floor, he said, "My thoughts tonight are most of all on how lucky I have been. How very, very lucky." So actually, Harris, we the ones who knew you, we're the ones who were lucky. Thank you for sharing your life with us.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Shriver. I was introduced earlier by Dan as being able to come here to represent the Shriver and the Kennedy families. My cousin Kathleen is here. Anyone who knows our family knows that no one represents the entire family. And so let me just make that first point of clarification. I'm also one of many, many speakers, and there were lots of emails, but there was one email I got 4 times that was addressed only to me, and it said, keep it to 4 minutes. 4 separate times I was reminded. So if someone sees that clock go beyond 4 minutes, scream. I think the first emotion I feel here today is one of gratitude, not just to Harris, but to the volunteers, to the Peace Corps volunteers, the AmeriCorps volunteers, and I would just... So maybe I'd ask everyone who's volunteered to stand. All of you, yeah, please rise. Look at this. Wow. Look at that. I think Harris once said to me, if Peace Corps and AmeriCorps volunteers only had uniforms, like the military, that we would have a proper sense of respect and awe and wonder for the service they have given, just as we honor and respect and have wonder for the service that men and women in uniform who serve in the military have. I think, though, that I can say that I hope I speak, and I'm sure I do, for Kathleen and her dad and my dad and mother and all of our parents' generation, who I'm sure were the welcome committee. I know there was a long line of people welcoming Harris to the next dimension, but I'm sure they would, we can agree that it is the people who just stood who are being honored today and who are Harris's greatest legacy, in addition to his family and Matthew. It is those men and women who make a sacrifice, who make a choice, who make a decision, who opt out of comfort and out of convenience and out of routine and out of the norm to cross some barrier, however close or distant it might be, to cross some barrier, whether it be a barrier of language or race or creed or color, geography or history, to cross some barrier to make their lives a bridge of healing and unity. And I think if there were one thing that Harris has lived his life for, at least as far as I could tell, it was to invite us all, in whatever small way we can, to make ourselves that bridge. When I grew up in my house, there were bishops and rabbis, there were nuns and other rebels, there were judges and juvenile delinquents, there were CIA agents and their favorite Peace Corps volunteers, there were civil rights and right-to-life people, communists and capitalists. There was an extraordinary array of people in this community of leaders and activists and political folks and social change folks who would convene in my house, not just my house, but in the Wofford house, in the Kennedy house. It was quite an extraordinary gathering, and someone might say, well, what was the defining feature? Who was limited? Who was out? I think the only people that were out were cynics. Everybody else was in. If you had a desire, if you were willing to be in the game, no matter what perspective you came from, you were in. Now, many people hear from their parents very important questions, things that resonated for them throughout their lives. The question that I remember most is coming into my house is saying, who are you? Shortly thereafter, are you leaving soon? You know? And if the person looked like they were going to stay, I would ask, where's my mother? Or my father. They were rarely there. But anyway, but the person who was there all the time was Harris. Harris did not show up at our house. I know you Woffords think he grew up with you, but I think he grew up in my house. My dad and Harris were so close that, you know how they say couples start to look alike? I actually mistook Harris for my father on 2 separate occasions. I walked into large gatherings like this and saw from the back of the room my head, and I was like, oh, Dad's here. You know, go over, hey, Daddy, and he turned around, hey, Timmy, you know, it's Harris. But it's worth noting that, at least in my, well, even before I was born in 1959, my family was involved in pretty much every presidential election from 1956 to 1980, either as a candidate or as a wannabe candidate or as a rumored candidate. And so was Harris. So was Harris. There was a relentless concern for national politics and for the elevation of issues. And it was in this extraordinary friendship, and I want to just read just a short sentence that my sister Maria wrote to Dan after Harris's sad passing. Our dad and your dad, she writes, how they loved each other, how they admired, respected, and understood each other. They had each other's back throughout life. What a glorious friendship to celebrate. I think throughout my dad's life, there was Harris as a mentor, Harris as a guide. My dad would drag Harris to Mass. Harris would drag my dad to Indian literature and remote philosophical treatises. They never seemed bothered by each other's differences, always enamored. Harris had more ideas than any man alive, and my dad had more willingness to talk about ideas than any man alive. And Harris could talk, I know, it's true, but my dad, no, I'm sorry. He could hold his own against Harris in that category or together with Harris. And I would just say in thinking about this era that Harris and my dad in some ways and so many other of yous lived together, there was in some sense a kind of politics that does not exist today. There was a politics that seemed to lionize justice over identity, equality over inequality. There was a sense in which, beyond all of our differences, the ideals would hold us together of justice and peace, of nonviolence, of overcoming. There was a sense in which transcending evil was the goal of politics, finding the middle pathway, not to accommodate, not to create false equalities, but to heal. And in Harris's life, we see not just the philosophical treatise of healing, the political action of healing, the social change, the rhetoric of healing, but maybe more than anything, because as we all know, those things will fade. We saw a life of healing. And when I look at the political spectrum today, I hunger, I yearn. I don't think Harris was ahead of his time. I think Harris was even ahead of this time. And we stand here today not just to celebrate who Harris was and what he did, but to try against the odds, to bring back and to bring us forward into what he yearned to create. I think I'm out of time. Just one story. He did have the capacity to confuse things and make you believe something that wasn't true. In 1996, I moved to Washington, and Harris at the time was involved in the transition plan for the second Clinton administration. He invited me to come down. I had just come from being a teacher for 15 years, and he said, I want you to help with setting the agenda for Clinton's second term. I said, wow, this is so exciting, Harris. This is amazing. So we had a couple of meetings. AnnMaura was there. And we're going to set the agenda. The president wants to hear from us, wants to know what we think, wants ideas for the second inaugural. Anybody here willing to help draft the second inaugural? And I was like, wow, this is a hell of a meeting I'm in. So I raised my hand. I say, well, you know, really? He says, yeah, you give it a shot. I think the president really would love to see what you've said. So I went home and I drafted the inaugural address, right? I know it sounds stupid, but I really believed that Harris was asking me. So I gave it to Harris. He said, wow, this was terrific. I took it over to the White House. They're very excited about it. I saw on the news a couple days later, someone was asking me, probably Paul Begala, plans for the second inaugural, the second administration. They said, yes, so many members of the cabinet have submitted ideas. And one cabinet member, one member of the team, went to the ridiculous extreme of submitting a fully drafted inaugural address. So I was like, oh, Harris. I don't. I thought about looking for it, but then I thought that's a waste of time. In his book of Kennedys and Kings, Harris wrote, "The mystery of how the minds and hearts and feet and votes of people are moved on issues of fundamental importance where prejudices or differences of opinion are deep-rooted remains one of the great questions vexing our republic, to which there is no easy answer. The principle of a tyranny is fear," says Montesquieu. "Of a republic it is learning." He writes, "Thanks to Dr. King and John and Robert Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson and Father Hesburgh and the Civil Rights Commission and the NAACP lawyers, the whole civil rights movement, and all the walking and voting and singing and suffering to the tapping of America's religious and political tradition, thanks to all the deaths even, somehow, in some strange way, the nation is learning." I think the nation will learn for many, many years from Harris Wofford, and as the sound that greeted him, I hope, is something that might have been heard in this hall many times, soon and very soon. We are going to see the King, and I think maybe if Harris heard that song when he was getting up to heaven, he might have thought it was about seeing Dr. Martin Luther King. But I hope and trust that he has found his way to that ruler, that king, that principle, that learning, that arc of change that is the divine energy that he so powerfully tried to bring to life here on earth. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Casey, and I want everyone to first pay some tribute to this great choir. What a magnificent... My wife Teresa and I are here and honored to be here, and we're grateful at this moment to be part of this celebration of Harris's life. We come here today with gratitude in our hearts. I think that's true of all of us, no matter what part of his life that we enjoyed with him. We, of course, want to extend both condolences and our best wishes and our love to Dan, Susanne, David, and Matthew, and the extended Wofford family, and all who are here. I just saw us coming in today, his brother Jack, and so many others. We all feel part of that family today. Why Teresa and I are so grateful to be here is that we're given an opportunity to pay tribute to a faithful friend, and in my case, to a Senate colleague from Pennsylvania. I'm one of his successors. And I think to all of us, we're blessed to pay tribute to an individual who can only be described as a servant leader, and someone who inspired me to try service at a young age. When I was in college, I guess most of this started with just something very simple, a book and an inscription in that book. The book happened to be Harris's 1980 book of Kennedys and Kings. And inside the cover, there was an inscription, and it read as follows. I just found this last night and took a picture of it to have it as a memory. Here's what it says very simply. It says, "For Bob, with warm regards, Harris," and then after that, it said, "A first copy, June 11th, 1980. Now, at the time, I was just finishing, I guess, my sophomore year in college, not having a game plan for what would happen next. But reading that great history of the 60s, which wasn't a total summary or history of the 60s, but a lot of it, it gave me an insight into that era when I was just growing up and didn't appreciate those events. But it also inspired in me a willingness to at least consider service. It ended up with, about a year and a half later, I decided to become a Jesuit volunteer. And I was at a Jesuit college, so of course, Holy Cross being a Jesuit college, they helped to inspire me, the Jesuits, and as did both of my parents. But part of that inspiration was Harris's life, as outlined in that book, and of course his commitment to service. In the Peace Corps, leading the Peace Corps, with Sergeant Shriver, but also his other ways of serving. But the inscription, of course, addressed to Bob was not me. It was my father. I didn't know Harris at the time, and I didn't realize at the time that the two of them had served in a law firm in Washington, Covington and Burling, still one of the great firms in the country, I think celebrating 100 years this year, if I'm right about that anniversary. But a remarkably talented group of lawyers in that firm, who was headed at the time by Dean Acheson, who was the Secretary of State for President Truman. So they served there together, or worked there together in the 50s, and then they went off into separate paths in life. Probably didn't see each other much in the 60s. You know what Harris was doing then. In the 70s, they came together again. Harris was at Bryn Mawr College as president. My father was still in office or running for office in the 70s. They came together in the 1978 campaign for governor in Pennsylvania, my father's third try in a primary. He lost. Harris stood with him in that election, but what I most remember about it, and still treasure today, and am still grateful to Harris today for this: after a loss, no one calls you. Take my word for it. I know what it's like. Or they'll call you the day after, or maybe Thursday, and then the phone call's in. But Harris, of course, was, as I said at the outset, a faithful friend. About a week after the election, he wrote an op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the title of it was, "In Many Ways, He's the Real Bob Casey." And in that one op-ed, He captured my father's character, his decency, his integrity, and his commitment to serve. Of course, we thought that was the last op-ed probably, because he had lost 3 times at that point. So the two of them, of course, continued on with their lives. Harris was at a Philadelphia law firm, my father was as well, not thinking what the next chapter would bring. In 1985, my father said, you know, I'm going to run for governor a 4th time. Don't try it, but he did, right? My mother was initially doubtful, and that's an understatement. But Harris signed up early, signed up in 85, into 86, and they finally won together. But along the way, my father gave Harris the opportunity, and that's a strong word, to use to be the Democratic Party chairman of the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania from June till November. It was a short chapter, but wow, that's considered by some, I guess, a lot of fun. But it's a tough job. And Harris grabbed it. He went everywhere, every county, everywhere he went, people enjoyed meeting him. And he did a great job. And of course, they won in November, and then my father said, well, Harris, you want to be a cabinet member? And he appointed him to be the Secretary of Labor and Industry, State Labor Secretary, a major position in government. I saw another Harris successor, Tom Foley, who's here, served in that position. But a big, big job in government, leading thousands of people on very complicated, difficult labor issues and business issues. Harris did so well, and who knows, he may have continued into well into a second term. He had just started a second term in 1991 in April. I think it was April the 4th when we got the terrible news about the tragic loss of John Hines. So there started the process of selecting a successor. My father called Harris one day and offered him the opportunity to be a United States Senator. And I remember, and I never told this to Dan, I remember my father calling me a couple days before he had made a decision, making the argument for why Harris should serve. And what I remember about that, if you knew my father, he had a rather aggressive way of making arguments when he felt he had a point of view. And he was making the argument not based upon some distinguished resume that Harris had, not simply based upon all of his great work up to that point in time, and as you heard earlier, he was about 65 years old. But he made the case to me on that phone call based upon, at least my recollection of it, based upon one quality: courage. Courage in the face of very dangerous circumstances. He said to me, he's an American hero, this guy. He went into the South and marched and served and brought people together for civil rights when it was hard. It always looks easy in the rearview mirror in the light of history. But to do what he did in those years required real courage. And it's not a word that we think of with Harris. He was not known as a tough guy, right? He was not known as someone who would knock your head off if he had to. But he had to display remarkable fortitude to do what he did. So I want Dan and the whole family to know that's the case that my father made to me. And of course, at the end of the conversation, he said, Dad, I think it's a good decision. But he was already there. I was blessed to be the beneficiary of Harris's friendship throughout those years, but more importantly, for me at least, when I was running in 2006 for the seat that he once held, and even thereafter when I was in the Senate after that. He was a mentor. He was an inspiration still all those years later, and we had, I guess, another chapter of friendship in those years. One memory, and I'll conclude, one memory stands out for me. Harris, we asked him to come back to our office one day, I guess it's now maybe 4 or 5 years ago, to talk to our staff. These are young people in their 20s and 30s, very few in their 40s and 50s, who had never experienced the stories about his life or maybe even some of the history. So we sat at a long conference table, and he at the front, I sitting next to him with microphones because it was a long table, and we had like a brown bag lunch with Harris Wofford. just telling stories and taking questions about his life and about the events that he was part of. It was a remarkable day for those young people to be able to hear directly from someone who was, in so many ways, in the best meaning of that word, an American hero. And we were so grateful to have been part of that moment. I wish we could recreate it today. Harris was a man, of course, of grace and warmth. He was a person for others, as the Jesuits would remind us that we should all be. But he was also someone who loved justice. How could he not, based upon what he did in his life? The best compliment I can pay to him is to summarize one of the great hymns in the Catholic faith, "We Are Called." And the refrain of that hymn, I think, is probably the best encapsulation of a life well lived. We are called to act with justice. We are called to love tenderly. We're called to serve one another and to walk humbly with God. All of those things Harris did. He certainly spent his life acting with justice, for justice, on behalf of those who needed a measure of justice. We were all the beneficiaries of his love. Service, my goodness, who can you think of that matches his commitment to service and serving one another? And yes, he did walk humbly with his God. With all that he was a part of, with all the great things he did, he still had a healthy dose, a full measure of humility all those years and in all those circumstances. So I would say Harris Wofford was called in so many ways to do the good work that he did on earth. Well done, faithful servant.
I am Pat McPherson. I had the great fun and sometimes challenge of working with Harris Wofford during his Bryn Mawr years. I'd like to start by thanking the whole Wofford family for bringing us all together for this splendid celebration and in this very appropriate place. Thank you all. And also, it was great to see all of the Peace Corps. It was also great to see all the Peace Corps people. Among them are some Bryn Mawr alumni, so terrific, all of you. Now, coming together with Harris's splendid family and with so many of the friends he made over the course of his amazingly rich, full, and consequential life has given us all an opportunity to think back this afternoon on some of the critical issues of our day that so benefited from Harris's energetic and always optimistic engagement. Harris spent only 8 years at Bryn Mawr as its president, but they were critical years for the country and for the college. And they served in an important way to launch Harris's role in Pennsylvania politics, which led eventually to his election to the Senate and later to his influential role in shaping national service programs and bringing the issue of access to affordable health care into the nation's policy conversations. He was only the second male president of Bryn Mawr, separated from Bryn Mawr's first male president by 3 formidable women, each of whom served for more than 20 years. Harris was president of SUNY's new experimental college, Old Westbury, when Bryn Mawr's presidential search committee came calling. Claire Wofford, who was witnessing one of Old Westbury's rather frequent student sit-ins, told one of the trustee members of the search committee that she hoped that whenever they left Old Westbury, Harris would do something like run a country grocery store and not work in any college. She was told coolly by the trustee that Bryn Mawr was not any college. And Harris always loved that story, and he told many alumni groups how right it was. Now, Harris and Claire both opened many windows and doors that needed opening at the college.
Committed to increasing diversity in the student body and faculty, Harris put college resources to supporting the recruitment of both American minorities and international students from across the globe, all essential to an education preparing women for the changing world in which they were expected to take leadership roles. Harris's deep commitment to the liberal arts and to encouraging students to get involved in the important issues before the country was a good balance for the times and just right for the college. Harris enjoyed those years. He delighted in the strong women he met and worked with, and admittedly learned from. And whether he was trying to coax Katharine Hepburn to come back to speak with students at her college, a notoriously difficult undertaking, or coping with Lillian Hellman, who insisted that he fill her water pitcher set on the rostrum for her reading with vodka, not water, or agreeing to represent Georgia O'Keeffe in her suit against her longtime live-in assistant, Juan Hamilton, after he got to know her when she had an exhibition of her work in Louis Kahn's building at the college. He relished those experiences. All during his time at Bryn Mawr, Harris was a fine model for young women who too often felt patronized by older men or by men expecting to be in charge. And Claire's involvement in the college, taking French and later working at Bryn Mawr, gave her an important role and modeled a good modern marriage and family life for all to enjoy. Working with Harris was always challenging and yet always fun. I learned much from him, and though I may have often slowed him down by insisting on college or the academy's protocols, I, as someone who had lived all my life in school, as it were, enjoyed hugely having my own horizons widened and my usual responses to issues or problems challenged. All of us here benefited from our friendships with Harris in the many different spheres in which we encountered him. He did have a great gift for friendship, but as I think about the state of our country today, what I find I value most about Harris and thinking back on him was his commitment to the idea of the common good, which so surely informed his own life, and the honest and decent way he always went about doing the colleges or the law firms or the nation's business. Thank you.
I work in radio, but I never know if that's going to work. I'm Brian Watt. In 1991, I became Harris Wofford's personal assistant during his Senate campaign. I drove, he rode in the front seat with a map on his lap. And it was because he knew I didn't know how to get anywhere in Washington or Pennsylvania. But it's also because that was Harris. It might have been a lot more senatorial to arrive somewhere in the back seat, but he rode in the front. And because that's the choice he made, we became very good friends. That campaign was a stunning, beautiful miracle. It seemed to pick up a little more momentum every day. But there was one day when a lot of us thought that momentum might be lost. There was one debate, and a lot of us were a little worried about how it was going to go. One televised face-off with Dick Thornburgh, the formidable two-term governor of Pennsylvania and U.S. Attorney General, and our man Harris, who was once described as rumple, more than once described as an egghead, and I actually think he kind of liked it. Harris was not really a politician. He had advised them, but he wasn't a politician, and we thought it might show that night. He had risen to so many of the campaign's challenges, but even holding his own in a debate with such a political powerhouse like Dick Thornburg seemed like asking a lot. He looked a little subdued that day. I would say daunted, but you never know what somebody's thinking right before they're going into a big event like that. So I decided to share with him some words I'd heard spoken by Doug Wilder, who was governor of Virginia at the time. He was the first black governor of Virginia. I was not brought into this world in defeat, nor does defeatism run or course the blood of my ancestors. I am not a sheep waiting to be prodded by some distant shepherd. I am a lion, and I don't want to know the sheep. Now, Harris was a note taker, and he tried to write all of that down. And I said, just go. Just think about it and go. And I tell you, Harris did more than hold his own that night. With all due respect to Dick Thornburg, Harris shocked and awed that man that evening. He was masterful in that debate. Now, something else happened right before that debate. Someone, I think it was James Carville, told Harris that his daughter was in labor and about to give birth to his second grandson. Didn't turn out to be true just yet, but I think that also helped in firing Harris up before going into this debate. But here's the deal. After that debate, he came out and he said, Brian, it's what you said that really helped me. And everywhere we went, he told everyone about how I had told him about not being a sheep, but being a lion. Sometimes he even brought me up and made me give the quote. And I guarantee you that if he were with us right now, and he is, he would insist on telling you about that and maybe even ask me to come up and read those words. At any rate, his family has asked that I read more inspiring words that capture Harris's spirit that meant a lot. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
I wish I could be with all of you as you celebrate the extraordinary life of Harris Wofford, quite fittingly at Howard University. I am personally very grateful for his life of service, for his early work in the civil rights movement, and his efforts to begin the Peace Corps and strengthen it in the Kennedy administration. But of course, I'm especially grateful that as senator, he sponsored the legislation to make Martin Luther King's birthday a day of service, or as we used to say, a day on, not a day off. And grateful that he helped me keep one of my most cherished campaign commitments, in supporting and leading the fight for the national service legislation, then accepting my request that he serve as the second CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service. Thanks to Harris and the other dedicated people who got America off to a good start, today, more than 1 million people have had the chance to give back to our country, helping to educate our children, build stronger communities, protect our public lands, clean up after disasters, and much, much more. New AmeriCorps members pledge to get things done for America, to take action, seek common ground, and persevere. Now that's a pretty good summary of Harris Wofford's long, good life. He was a world-class doer. As we pay tribute to and give thanks for his life, I hope more people will follow his example and live by his creed, that we all have a responsibility to use our time and talents for the common good. My thoughts, my heart, are with Matthew, David, Daniel, Susanne, and all those who loved him and whose love he returned.
He called me last night. He wants you to know how desperately he wishes he could be here, and he wants me to call when this is over. So I know what I'm going to say, though. Sir, the memories from the family were humorous and loving. The appreciations from the leading politicians were really inspiring and wonderful. But the thing he's going to be most upset about is he didn't get to hear the Howard University Choir sing "Oh Freedom." Thank you all very much. You're terrific. You're just wonderful. And he reminded me last night that in the black church, a funeral is called a homegoing. So Dr. Frederick, thank you for welcoming Harris and his, as we say in the Catholic Church, his whole mishpucha here to your home. Matthew, Suzanne and Jacques, Danny and Sarah, David and Betsy, to Harris's grandchildren, Gabe and Nat, Ben and Andrew, Cole and Ian, thank you for sharing with us your husband, your father, your Papa Harris. For Harris to have lived the public life that he lived placed a special burden on you, and one that you really didn't sign up for. So I want to thank you. I know Harris would, and I want to thank you on behalf of the world that you helped make so much better through your sacrifice and service. So thank you to his family. This man's life and work and vision and career, it spans so many decades. I'm the new kid on the block, and I only knew him for 33 years. I met him first working for Bob's father, the Democratic nominee for governor of Pennsylvania in 1986. And as Bob pointed out, he was supporting Mr. Casey then, and the Pennsylvania Democratic Party at that time had a rich tradition of corruption. In fact, those of you, I think Governor Wolf is from Central PA, but those of you from Philly will know there was a great old saying at the time in the Democratic Party in that Commonwealth: when I die, I want to be buried in Philly so I can remain active in the party. Well, Bob, your father was straighter than a West Texas highway, and he wanted a state party chair who was as incorruptible as he was. So he asked his friend Harris to chair the party, and Harris and I became friends. And Bob, he gave me a copy of that book as well, of Kennedys and Kings, which I do commend to you, and he inscribed it. And here's what he wrote to me. 1986, 33 years ago, I was still in law school. He said, to Paul Begala, who will have his own story to tell. Well, yes, I do, Harris, and a lot of them revolve around you. When tragedy took Senator Hines, Governor Casey, as Senator Casey pointed out, called on Harris to serve in the Senate, and we had a special election 5 months later. Dick Thornburg, the beloved former governor and attorney general, decided he might want to seek that race, and when he announced, we did a poll, and we were behind by 47 points. We didn't have 47 points. We were behind by 47 points. I just wanted to gain 30 so we could get our butts whipped. But fortunately, Wofford was a natural, tireless and charming, steely and driven. But enough about Claire. You know that's true. God bless Claire. And so Harris became a senator, and when he gave his first floor speech in the Senate, I, his campaign manager, was so excited. This is a chance now to get in the game, right? To begin to set the agenda for this election that was coming up so fast against this opponent who was so formidable. There was a recession on, so of course I advised Harris to talk about jobs. So he gave his first floor speech about India. India! Harris, India! India is not in Pennsylvania. Indiana is in Pennsylvania. Indiantown Gap is in Pennsylvania. India's not. Unflappable as always, he said, yeah, but Paul, I actually know something about India. Rookie mistake for a senator, give a speech about something you actually know something about. But India notwithstanding, Harris focused his vision on that campaign. He focused our campaign on health care. And Harris was right, and the voters responded. I will also note that Harris Wofford practiced what he preached. He was the first politician I ever heard of who insisted on providing health insurance for his campaign staff, some of whom were here. After all, if a criminal has a right to a lawyer, a campaign staffer has a right to see a doctor. Harris was a great senator. He represented a state which at the time had the second largest number of NRA members, and yet he voted for the Brady Bill, for a waiting period on gun purchases, for a ban on assault weapons. He was courageous as a senator. Closest to his heart, he was instrumental in creating AmeriCorps, as President Clinton said. Because of Harris, over 1 million young people have now performed over 2 billion hours of service and trillions of acts of patriotism and kindness. And Harris, in the Senate, worked with his friend, Congressman John Lewis, to write the King Holiday Service Act, honoring his friend Martin Luther King with what Harris called a day on, not a day off. And you know, even in the ways that he was not a good politician, Harris was still a great senator. We were, to put it mildly, an underdog in that campaign, and raising money was not easy. I will note that while the governor who appointed him was breaking his back to do all he could, at the beginning stages of that campaign, we were so far behind that his Democratic colleagues in the Senate wouldn't fund his campaign. The DSCC said, we're not going to give you any money. So we had a big meeting. Well, actually, it was a small meeting, about 6 or 7 senators. And here I am a few weeks after my 30th birthday, sitting in there trying to beg for money. And Harris made his case. And the person who was running the DSCC said, well, what are you asking for? And I piped up and said, well, the legal limit is $978,000. That's what we're asking for. And the chairman of the DSCC said, well, that's 20% of everything that we have raised. We can't do that for a guy in a special election who's 47 points behind. What am I going to do in 1992 for the whole class of senators who are up? And a freshman senator from South Dakota stood up and said, I am in that class of 1992, and the best way for me to win in South Dakota in 1992 is for you guys to help Harris win in Pennsylvania in 1991. Tom Daschle, thank you for playing the instrumental role. Absolutely instrumental. You know, people wonder what goes on in the smoke-filled rooms, and sometimes it's awful, but sometimes courage breaks out, and that was one of those times. There was another time in Harris's Senate office when I saw him display that same kind of courage. We'd had a D.C. fundraiser lobbyist type assigned to us to help raise money from the various lobbying groups in Washington, and he burst into Harris's office one day, unannounced, didn't knock, just busted in and said, do you know what you've done? You just cost me $50,000. I had a $50,000 fundraiser set up with the billboard industry. And you just voted for a legislation that would restrict billboards on interstate highways. And Harris said, well, yeah, I'm an environmentalist, and there's too many billboards on the highways. And the guy said, well, you just cost me $50,000. And Harris calmly dismissed him and said, well, that may be, but there are too many billboards on the highways. He was truly a visionary. One of the few I think I've ever known. He saw truths as self-evident, and that's why he expressed them so fearlessly. Yet, like all visionaries, Harris did have his blind spots. When his close aide and friend David Stone tried to pitch him a one-liner about cheesesteaks, Harris had no idea what he's talking about. Steak with cheese on it? That sounds awful, David. A senator from the suburbs of Philly who doesn't know what a cheesesteak is. That was the duality of Harris. He was a white man here at Howard, where I'm pretty sure his nickname was, "Are you lost?" He was a Christian who worked on a kibbutz, a lawyer who counseled Dr. King to disobey the law of Jim Crow, a soldier who marched for nonviolence across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a Protestant who converted to Catholicism, prompting his beloved wife Claire to pronounce him downwardly mobile. And he did love Claire. I never saw a person sob as deeply as Harris did when he lost her. And then years later, for those tears to turn to joy, when he fell in love with and married Matthew. And he called me. He asked me to look over an op-ed that he had drafted for the New York Times announcing this. Ever the political consultant, I said, "Really, Harris, do you have to announce this in a newspaper read by millions of people? Like, a 6-line wedding announcement won't do for you?" And he said, "No, this is the last great civil rights movement of my life," he said. And he was right. And he said, "Besides, I don't think about gender when I fall in love." You know what I thought about? St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, where he said, "There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Harris contained multitudes, but he believed we were all one. And from Selma to the Senate, from Ethiopia to Easton, from FDR's Army Corps to JFK's Peace Corps, Harris left the world fairer and freer, more equal and more equitable. Harris Wofford was given many gifts, including the gift of time. And he used every day to fulfill the charge that his friend Robert Kennedy left us, a command from the ancients that is still relevant today, more so today than ever, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of the world. God bless you, Harris.
Well, you can imagine it's a super easy task to speak today. I'm John Gomperts, and I'm part of the battalion of people who worked with Harris over the years, many of whom are here with us this afternoon. And as much as we are celebrating Harris, Pat mentioned that Harris wasn't always easy to work with. So I just want to share with you a couple of stories to give you a sense of what it was like to be with Harris day after day in a working situation. Starting right at the beginning. Snapshot. I'm scheduled to interview with Harris in the Senate office on January 3rd, 1992. My daughter Lily is born that morning, so we reschedule. I'm at his house in Bryn, Mawr the following Monday, January the 6th. I arrive promptly. Harris is not ready. He takes me to the living room, introduces me to Claire, and disappears. Claire, who is a truth-telling force of nature, smiles. She asks me to sit down, and then she says this: Harris promised 4 things in his campaign, and of course, 2 of them are completely ridiculous and absolutely antithetical to his fundamental beliefs and his life's work. What do you propose to do about that? "30 minutes later, I'm still fumbling through my answer when a half-dressed Harris Wofford appears and announces we have to leave now. We pile into Todd Bernstein's car, and my interview involves arguing about which Democratic candidate we like in the presidential sweepstakes in 1992, while Harris tries to put on a tuxedo in a fast-moving car. I get the job, and I end up working and arguing with Harris in the Senate, at the Corporation for National and Community Service, at America's Promise, and actually for the rest of his crazy life. Snapshot. It's October 1993. Democrats are floundering. Healthcare is nowhere. The budget bill is unpopular. And then a Black Hawk helicopter is shot down and 18 Americans are killed in Somalia. An evening session of the Senate intersects with a DC fundraiser. My job? Get Harris to the fundraiser. Harris, of course, wants to stay for the debate. I get Harris as far as the Senate steps, and I say, "You gotta go." He refuses. And we get into it a little bit right there on the Senate steps. And those of you who know Harris and encountered Harris know that Harris is always a little bit of a close talker, right? This evening, I match Harris. So there we are on the Senate steps, sort of chest to chest, arguing about what we're going to do. And exasperated, I finally say, "Harris, there isn't a single voter in Pennsylvania who wants us to stay in Somalia and do nation building." And Harris rises to his full height, and he sticks out that considerable chest of his, and he says, "You're wrong. I do." That's Harris Wofford in the Senate. One last snapshot. Las Vegas, 1999. Middle of the night cab ride to Caesar's Palace for a conference about service and volunteering. 5,000 people are coming, and Harris is energized by that turnout. In the cab, he's enthusing once again about making service the common expectation and common experience of all Americans. We get out of the cab and we walk into Caesar's Palace lobby. It's 2:15 in the morning. The lights are blazing, the machines are clanging, bells are ringing, people are drinking. You've all been there. And Harris Wofford, the ultimate National Service and Volunteer booster and enthusiast, turns to me and he says, "John, I'm afraid we've got a long way to go with that common expectation and common experience thing." Working with Harris and being friends with Harris was a weird and wondrous wild ride, filled with adventure, commitment, argument, learning, and humor. I'll miss it. We'll all miss it.
Good afternoon. My name's Greg Petersmeyer, and I met Harris one morning 30 years ago last month. President George H.W. Bush had just been inaugurated. I was putting together a new office, the White House Office of National Service, and setting out to try to help President Bush meaningfully engage part of his presidency in what became known as points of light. Individuals and groups, each acting voluntarily on their own values and with their own agency and liberty to help others and change lives for the better. At the time, Harris was a member of Governor Robert Casey's cabinet. But that morning, listening to Harris and his story and what he believed mattered most to the future of America, you couldn't tell whether he was a Democrat or a Republican. For him, of course, a clear North Star was service, more specifically national service. Sometimes the N and the S were capitalized, and sometimes not. Over the next 30 years, President Bush and Harris shared respect and affection for one another, and shared wisdom about the value of service. 2 men, 1 idea. And I was a witness to it along the way. For example, when President Bush created the first daily recognition program from the White House in American history to honor points of light and their stories, Harris thought it was a terrific idea. And he felt the same way when the Points of Light Foundation was started. Harris supported, of course, the National and Community Service Act of 1990, which President Bush signed into law. When Harris led the corporation, and with Points of Light wanted to co-sponsor an historic President's Summit for America's future in Philadelphia in 1997, President Bush was the first president to agree to participate. And Harris and President Bush both supported what followed, which was America's Promise, chaired by Colin Powell. In the early 1830s, after the French diplomat, political scientist, and historian Alexis de Tocqueville traveled throughout this country making careful notes about all he saw and experienced, he returned to Paris to write his famous book, Democracy in America. In it he wrote, "I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. In her fertile fields and boundless forests, and it was not there. In her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. In her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution, and it was not there. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because she is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great." Above all else, Harris was a great man because he was good. Somewhere in the beyond, this afternoon, there may be 2 men sitting and talking under a tree in the distance. A passerby with Alexis de Tocqueville might ask, "Who are those men?" De Tocqueville might reply, "They're the Americans, Harris Wofford and George Bush. They recently arrived. You know, America is that place with a national character unique in the world. I discovered it almost 200 years ago. Like their country, those 2 believe in coming together voluntarily, just to help one another. They believe in service, and they believe in light. And they believe that any definition of a successful life must include serving others. I think that's why they're here."
Hi, my friends. It's Peter Yarrow, and I wish I could be with you, but I'm on the road, as you can see. But I'm honored to be able to share with you his beloved family and friends. Harris is this song by Woody Guthrie. Let's sing along with me, as Harris would have wanted you to. I roamed and I rambled and I followed my footsteps from the sparkling sands of a diamond desert, and all around me A voice was calling. This land was made for you and me. Now you sing with me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the redwood forests to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As the sun was shining and the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds rolling, as the fog was lifting, oh, and all around me I heard a voice calling. How it might have been Woody. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. Here is Harris, from California to the New York Island. From the redwood forests, Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. Nobody living can ever stop me, that's Harris, as I go walking down that freedom highway. Nobody living can make me turn back, 'cause this land was made for you and me. With me again. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. Whoa, redwood forests to the Gulf Stream of water. This land was made for you and me. Harris, you helped make this land good and heartfelt for you and me. Oh, me. Love you.
Good afternoon, friends of Harris Wofford and my family, the Woffords. The reason why I am sitting next to Matthew and Jack Wofford is because I'm the white sheep of the Wofford family. In the words of Queen Elizabeth, grief is the price we pay for love. I grieve today because I love Harris. Yes, I said I love, as in the present tense. Harris lives within my heart, and I am certain within the hearts of everyone sitting here today. He has touched countless people and helped them grow in so many ways, as a parent, a friend, a college president, a U.S. senator, a mentor, and of course, as my surrogate dad. I first met Harris in 1963 almost 56 years ago. At that time, Harris was the director of the U.S. Peace Corps in Ethiopia. While in Ethiopia, he had wanted to visit a 13th century Coptic Christian monastery. The monastery was located on the top of an 8,000-foot mountain outside my home city of AnnMaura, Eritrea. To accompany this important man, my 7th grade Peace Corps teacher selected 2 students, including me, to serve as Harris's guides and translators. Needless to say, I was eager to converse with this important foreigner despite my flawed English. The hike up to the mountain took a little over 3 hours, climbing over steep terrain to reach the monastery. As a young boy, I was intensely curious about this foreign man, and naturally, I was not sure what to say to him. However, Harris put me at ease and took the lead shaping our conversation. He began asking questions about growing up in my country, about my views, if any, about the world beyond, and about my school and my family. I have never met anyone like him. I have never encountered a person who spoke about the magical, wider world beyond the borders of my beloved city. By the time we reached the monastery, I wonder if perhaps Harris has known me from a previous life. His spirit was my spirit. 5 years later, in 1968, my fate was determined by Harris's appointment as the first president of the State University of New York at Old Westbury. In the fall, Harris recruited me from my home to be one of the first 85 students to plan a new college. It quickly became clear, however, that Old Westbury was not right fit for Harris or for me. So shortly thereafter, he became the president of Bryn Mawr College. Again, through Harris's recommendation, I followed him to Haverford College. Finally, as a newcomer to the US, I had not known much about the history of this country's racial divides. It was here that I learned about Harris's passion for racial justice and his tireless effort to achieve it. That combination of vision, commitment, and determination took Harris to Africa. It took him to the mountain top outside AnnMaura, and it took me with him to heights I could have never reached without his help and guidance. So Susie, Dan, David, I can tell you today, I'm truly your brother. and your love and grief are mine as well. Our God has blessed us all as our souls have been touched by Harris. May he rest in peace. Thank you.
I am Harris's brother, Jack, or as I have said for many years, Harris was my brother. One needed to assert oneself in growing up with Harris. I think I can safely say that I've known Harris longer than anybody in this room. I'm 9 years younger. I'm going to spare you the memories of those 92 of his years, but instead tell a couple of stories that happened when I was much too young to realize what was going on. And I want to just disagree slightly with the earlier point that Harris wasn't a politician. Family lore says that he was actually a politician by about age 10. There was, some of you may have read in the history books, controversy across the Atlantic. The King of England wanted to marry an American socialite who had been divorced twice, Wallis Simpson. Stanley Baldwin, the Prime Minister, said the king had to make a choice: marriage and abdicate. If he wanted to keep the throne, no more Wallis. So family lore says that my 10-year-old brother put a sign on our lawn in Scarsdale, New York, "Down with Stanley, long live the king!" I was telling this story a couple of weeks ago, and Sarah pointed out to me, isn't that interesting that even at that age, Harris realized that marriage was about love. And Matthew is here. I need to also recognize that I greeted, as I arrived today, Bishop Gene Robinson, who was the first openly gay bishop in the Episcopal Church. So I'm going to just tell a brief story that comes out of Harris's slim but powerful book, Getting to Yes, written when he was 19. It's up to us. Correct. Slim but powerful. So many of you know about and have heard a bit today about his adventure with our grandmother when he was 11, returning when he was 12, taken out of school for 6 months to go all around the world. It was 1937-38. Europe was preparing for war. Japan had started a war. In Rome, they saw fascist dictator Mussolini on his balcony. In Bethlehem on Christmas Eve, the peace was shattered by gunfire. In Shanghai, they went in after the Japanese had bombed and were occupying. In Japan, they saw soldiers everywhere. Harris returned truly a citizen of the world. He saw history in the making. But aside from those major events, one scene in the book says a lot about the future Harris. In Egypt, at the pyramids, Harris writes that the guide had arranged for some native musicians to come and visit our tents in the evening to play and dance for us. But they were far more interested in American dances. Yes, they would entertain us if I would demonstrate American dancing to them. I then did the Big Apple for them there in the desert. Now, if you don't know the Big Apple, which I didn't, I'd heard about it forever, but I looked it up on YouTube, and it is truly a wild and crazy group dance that was all the rage in the 1930s. So, you know, just picture this 11-year-old jumping and gyrating and enjoying every minute of it, liking the spotlight, I'm sure, and making friends in the process. I made many friends around the earth, he writes about the trip. Not only was the world one, but people everywhere were much the same underneath their skin, their customs, their clothes, and their prejudices. People may get twisted politically, emotionally, religiously, but underneath they are the same. Too soon the trip was over. He's still writing. But a young boy had learned many lessons and seen many things which had started him thinking about the world. I can see Harris there in the desert, releasing his free spirit and beginning to think about the wonderful, challenging, interconnected world and his place in it. In a way, he did the Big Apple for the rest of his life, enlisting all of us in his exuberant dance, a dance of adventure, spontaneity, creativity, drive, joy, and love, his dance of life.
Tinastaline, Indimanalu. For those who are Ethiopian or returned Peace Corps volunteers who served in Ethiopia are probably gleefully laughing at my pronunciation, just like the Ethiopian taxi drivers would do when Harris greeted them with those Amharic words, followed by the town villages, Addis Ababa, Hawassa, Gondar, Dir Dawa, Desi, Mekelle, and the talk of knowing the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. I never visited Ethiopia, but I felt I'd visit there many times. Even though I heard it repeatedly for almost 18 years, I never grew tired of it. It was always that greeting from Harris that sparked immediate friendships with taxi drivers. I never imagined a taxi ride could be interesting and special. But it was that kind of greeting that symbolized an 18-year relationship with the most wonderful man I could ever have met. It was during a time I had just moved to Fort Lauderdale to begin industrial design classes at the Art Institute. Saturday had arrived, and a Pakistani friend, Ali Khan, had called me to join him and his partner at the beach. It was a stunningly beautiful day, and Ali and I were talking in waist-deep water when a gregarious man approached us while swimming. Wearing dark green shorts, trunks, he introduced himself as Harris Wofford, whom Ali had come to remember sitting across from a dinner table at a Nantucket party a couple years earlier. But as we continued to introduce each other, I'll never forget Harris's smile and curiosity. I wasn't aware of who he was at the time, but I wanted to know him. We walked along the beach for about an hour talking about life and religion. I remember his passionate spirit and his curiosity about life. I thought to myself, this guy is different and special. It was at that moment I knew that I might be spending a good portion of my years with this man. And here we are, 18 years later. Life was wonderful knowing Harris in the first 10 years. However, distant, closeted, in fear of what family and others would think, it did present challenges for both of us. It wasn't easy, but Harris and I realized what we had, a loving relationship that was unique. There are those who would question that I was 50 years his junior. Harris would like to say 49 and a half. Yes, the age gap may have sounded strange to many, separate from the norms. And we were a minority of a minority. But as our love evolved, it took over. We treated each other as equals. Some would say it's a father-son mindset. I can assure you, no, it wasn't. Or others would say that I'm an acolyte. No, it wasn't that either. We both had a youthful zest for life, nature, and people. Just some of the many things we had in common. There was a day Harris and I went to see the Impressionist exhibit at the Phillips Gallery here in D.C. I'd made my way a few paintings beyond Harris that put me on the other side of the room. I turned around to see where Harris was, and I noticed him whispering into a guy's ear, to which the guy turned around in horror. I said to myself, oh no. What does Harris just say to this guy? I walked over to Harris and said, what did you say to him? And he said, well, I was admiring this painting, The Café Terrace on the Night from Van Gogh, and I whispered into this guy's ear, thinking it was you, I want to go to Paris with you. That's Harris. We laughed out loud, which made everyone in the room turn to us. Harris and I knew how to have a good laugh. Love is powerful. It transcends age, sex, color, religion, distance, and nothing else matters. But so often, many fall victim to the fears of what others think, or how it will affect their legacy, prestige, or that it doesn't subscribe to their religious doctrine. These types of fears create damaging stereotypes and stigmas that can influence political and religious institutions, preventing couples such as Harris and me from experiencing the joys of loving each other. In 2016, Harris wrote an op-ed that was published in the New York Times explaining his decision to marry me. He elaborated on how too often society seeks to label people, pinning them on a wall, straight, gay, or in between. Harris said, I don't categorize myself based on the gender of those I love. He's right. Those frivolities, criticisms, and fear fell to the wayside. Harris and I decided we could no longer be apart, and so I moved to D.C. The beauty of Harris's love for life, nature, poetry, spirituality, and people always amaze me. I'll never forget an endearing moment when Harris and I walked along the Nantucket path behind the house to the beach. It was laden with buttercup flowers. It was a beautiful day. Harris looked down at the flowers and said, "My life is like a buttercup reaching for the sky." Harris was always reaching for the beauty in everyone and in nature. The beauty of his mindset always was his belief in the good of others who were not like-minded. The color of your skin, social status, your religion, your political party were irrelevant. If you were standing in front of Harris, you were important to him. Every day of every month of every year, we called each other to confirm our love. When I moved to D.C. and we were together almost 24/7, the words "I loved you" flowed naturally and easily, as if we couldn't say them enough. Harris would always say, "We need to write our own song, one that recognized our love for each other." On April 31st, 2016, we acted on our love and got married. Our marriage wasn't welcomed by some, including family members on both sides. And the reasons were many. It was against religious beliefs, legacy, an embarrassment, or misunderstanding. We understood those reasons, and we learned to endure them. We simply chose not to let fear undermine our love and joy for one another. Harris was a free spirit and was tone deaf to the fears that plagued many. It reminds me of a William Blake poem. "He who binds to himself a joy does this winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies rises in eternity's sunrise." During Harris's remaining years, Harris and I had many discussions about family, life, and death. We would talk of his wife, Claire, and what she meant to Harris. Harris told of the beautiful mind and the soul and what a tough and ardent critic she was. A friend once asked me, "How does it make you feel to hear Harris talking about Claire?" I responded by saying, "I hope he never stops, and I would be greatly disappointed if he did." He loved Claire immensely, and it meant a lot to me that he would share his love for Claire with me. For the past couple of years, I became fascinated as random strangers would periodically approach Harris to say, "You are a blessed man." That's the effect Harris had on people. He touched the lives of many. There are many of you here today who know what I'm talking about. Harris was wonderful and magical. Harris never feared death. We occasionally talked about it as we would sit at our bench along the Potomac River or walking towards the Trinity Tree. We could discuss anything, however difficult it may have been. But we both realized the winged chariot was hurrying near. This past Christmas, Harris and I were enjoying a sunny day on the lawn at my mother's house. Harris was having a moment of reflection about his life when I noticed a tear. I asked if he was okay. He turned around and said, "I know my time is short, Matthew. But I don't want to die because I love being with you. I said to him, "You'll always be with me, Harris. Then I will always be with you. We'll never be apart." As I was saying my goodbye to Harris shortly before he passed away, I read a poem to him by Henry Van Dyke, whom a friend had shared with me that had provided him comfort for when his mother had passed away. And it has also provided comfort to me. I know Harris is just beyond the horizon, and I, too, will see him when I cross it. I am standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until at length she hangs like a speck of white cloud, just where the sea and the sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, "There, she is gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight. That is all. She is just as large in mast, hull and spar as she was when she left my side. And she is just as able to bear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone says, "There, she is gone," there are other eyes watching her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here she comes." I love you, Harris. Susanne Wofford, beyond measure.
I wish there were dozens of Harris Woffords around. He is an absolutely wonderful person. I loved him and his wife and his kids, and I wish them all well. And I have to say my life was enriched because of the many difficult days and nights I spent with Harris on trying to face up to real American problems.
Because you have different political views, and because you're from different political parties, that does not mean that you have to be enemies. You cannot work together. I've enjoyed working together with Senator Wofford, and I will always have great respect for him.
Organizer of the Peace Corps, advisor to Martin Luther King, special assistant to the President of the United States. I mean, you name it, he has fulfilled the office of public citizen more fully than anyone in my experience.
Well, Harris Wofford is a multi-dimensional individual in a world, for example, in the United States, a Senate where other members come to the Senate and they're interested in one issue, and that issue either successful or it fails, and they move on into something else. But Harris's commitment to the public service is ongoing, continuing, And it's an inspirational story, and it continues to inspire. I think that's the definition of a useful and constructive life.
Senator Wofford, is a grandfather or father maybe of the service movement, and it's a tribute to him that we're all here today. The more you do, the more you want to do. So I hope that everybody else gets that. Yeah, exactly.
We begin by thanking Harris Wofford for his contributions to this country in so many different ways. He exemplifies what we mean by the word citizen. Now, Harris Wofford's devoted his entire life to creating opportunities for Americans to serve. And the reason it's such a privilege for me to share the stage with him is because volunteering in America is at the highest level it's been in years. And I know that makes Harris proud to hear.
Now comes the rebuttal. So I want to thank the Service Corps for leading us in today, to officials, elected and not, who are staying through a Harris Wofford-style event. Matthew, as always, thank you for being in our lives. And Tim, I really want to thank you for letting me know where my father's been all these years, so it's really great. So what do we make of this life and these stories? Who was this person? I've been asking that question since I was very young. When my dad would recall his early political stirrings, he'd declare in all sincerity, "I was ardently against Roosevelt's plan to pack the Supreme Court in 1937. We fought night and day to stop him." I'd say, "Dad, who's we? You and your 6th grade classmates?" So it's not easy to characterize Harris. My dad didn't particularly like categories or even fit neatly into any, which frustrated journalists who had fell to caricaturing him as a Tweedy professor or a Mr. Smith coming to Washington. He was neither. He was not exactly a liberal. He liked to talk about fighting with liberal leaders opposed to many things he cared about. He saw self-government as a force for creativity and good, but he hated bureaucracy, and helped create the Peace Corps' 5-year flush, a term limit for bureaucrats. Harris certainly wasn't a moralist. He reserved his moral judgments mainly for certain food groups that he found particularly uplifting, such as yogurt, fresh vegetables, and soup. Many of you think of Harris as an idealist, but I don't think that's quite right either. I've come to the conclusion that my father was an ideaist. He lived for and through the big ideas that animated him: world federalism, civil disobedience, and national service, among others. And he believed in putting ideas into action. We all have funny stories about how out of touch he was with popular culture. Just maybe that's because he connected to the world and to people through these animating ideas. I remember sometime in the 1970s, Dad said to me, "David, have you heard of the TV show MASH?" I said, "Yes, Dad, it's the top show on TV these days." "Well," he said, "my good friend Mike Farrell is on that show, and he's passionate about national service." Sure, he doesn't even know who Alan Alda is. Harris saw the best in people through big ideas, touching people of all stripes, many of whom are in this room. My father believed great ideas could come from anywhere and anyone. Some in this room may recall how he would protest after his Senate election, "Don't call me Senator, call me Harris." This wasn't some affectation. He didn't like titles or age or anything else getting in the way of someone sharing their ideas. And good ideas could come from surprising places, like the backwater civil rights section of a campaign, suggesting a call, or a doctor in Philadelphia wondering why the Constitution didn't guarantee a right to the doctor. Or even a 20-something White House staffer who came to the Department of Education when I worked there This kid briefed us on the new national service legislation, and he said, and I kind of groaned as I knew what was coming, as Senator Wofford says, it's an invitation to the imagination. My dad had his favorite phrases and metaphors, like cracking the atom of civic power. I like to ask him about his plans for removing the civic nuclear waste. And Dad would laugh. He had inherent gentleness and a sense of life's and his own absurdity. This gentleness and his myriad quirks may have led some to underestimate him. He was tactical, tenacious, and tough. And he wasn't afraid of a little heat. During his TV debate with Dick Thornburg, the moderator cautioned that the candidates were getting heated. Harris retorted, "You need a little heat to get some light." Heat, light, fire. A few years ago, Dad gave a speech about Teilhard de Chardin, the Catholic philosopher. My father said his heart leapt as he read de Chardin in the 1950s, and it connected him to Shriver and Hesburgh and many others. He was taken by de Chardin's call to restore the ancient idea of creative fire, heat and light, as a metaphor for the constructive force needed to bring peace and heal divisions. So it is fitting to close now, finally, with a favorite quote of his and Shriver's and Hesburgh's. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, so very much. I neglected in my opening acknowledgments to recognize, and I'm particularly embarrassed about this, he's a fellow jurist from the Ninth Circuit who also is the result of Harris's work in getting judges confirmed. Bill Canby from the Ninth Circuit. Bill, I'm going to call you. We need to get together, and we will, even though you're on the West Coast. I can do all this within 4 minutes, and I will. I could not help but think, I never thought about this before, in terms of his concern for the common person, racial equality, and just decency. It was so fitting that Peter Yarrow sang a Woody Guthrie ballad, because I began to see the parallels between the musical Woody Guthrie and the civic engagement of Harris Wofford. And it's very profound, and I think it's very real. And what I wanted to insert that I can get within my 4 minutes, and I was reminded of this when I saw the tape of President Obama. I remember getting a phone call many years ago, and I picked up the phone, and it was Harris. And he said, "Ted," it's Harris Wofford. He said, "Harris, this is such an honor. What can I do for you?" And he goes, "Well, actually, I didn't call to speak with you. I called to speak to your wife, Anna. Is she there?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll call her." And I called Anna, and I said, "None of my business, Harris, but I'm just curious. I haven't seen you in a while." And he said, "Well, Barack Obama is going to be holding a fundraiser in Philadelphia, and I know you can't go. You can't be involved in politics because you're a federal judge, but I wanted to ask your wife if she'll go as my date." You know? And he said, "This is very early in the campaign, may have been his first major fundraiser." I said, "Harris, I'm sure she'd be honored to go with you, but let me ask you, do you really, in your heart of hearts, think that this country is ready to elect a black president in your lifetime or my lifetime?" And he said, "Ted, I'll tell you, Barack Obama reminds me so much of the young Jack Kennedy, and I've told him that, and I wouldn't be spending my time promoting his candidacy if I didn't think he had a real chance of winning the presidency." And for that moment, for the first time in a long time, the innate cynicism and pessimism that I harbor when it comes to racial relations in this country gave way to hope. And thank goodness Harris was right and I was wrong. Given what we've heard about the public servant, father, politician, statesperson, educator, and friend that was Harris Wofford, there is little left to say. However, before the closing hymn, I want to share a reflection that I've carried ever since that morning when I saw an email message that I knew would inform me of Harris's passing because of the person it was from the videographer, Jacob Finkel, and it was encaptioned sad news. I immediately knew what it was. It took me actually 2 days to read the email. From that moment to this, I've been reminded of Mark Antony's reflection on the battlefield in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. As Mark Antony there looked down on the fallen Brutus, even though they had been bitter adversaries in life, Mark Antony commented as follows: "This was the noblest Roman of them all. He acted from honesty and for the general good. His life was gentle, and the elements mixed so well in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, 'This was a man.' And so I say to all of you, with apologies to the now dated gender-based acclamation, each of us can agree as we think of the remarkable blend of humanity, decency, compassion, civic engagement, intellect, and caring that was so remarkably woven into the fabric of Harris Wofford. As Mark Antony said, he acted from honesty and for the general good. His life was gentle, and the elements mixed so well in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, 'This was a man, and this was our friend, Harris Wofford.'" Thank you so very much for coming. As we hear the final hymn, the family will form a recessional line and be willing to meet with folks outside in the lobby. You're also invited downstairs for light refreshments, and if you go through the lobby toward where the recessional line will be forming, you'll be able to find your way downstairs to the light refreshments. Thank you very much.